The moment you feel the urge to explain yourself, something has already gone wrong. Not externally, internally. Before the words even form, before you choose your tone or search for the right justification, your body has already reacted. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts accelerate. A subtle panic moves through you, not because you are wrong, but because you are being seen in a way you cannot control. And that sensation of being misread, misunderstood, or quietly judged is enough to make you surrender ground without realizing it. Most people think defending themselves is a rational act. It isn't. It is a reflex, a conditioned response to the threat of losing standing, belonging, or legitimacy in the eyes of another. And the danger is not that you speak. The danger is what speaking confirms. Every time you rush to clarify, to justify, to correct the record, you silently agree to a premise you never consciously chose: that the other person has the authority to evaluate you, that their perception matters more than your internal stability, that you are standing in a courtroom that already existed before you arrived. This is why defense feels urgent, because on some level, you believe a verdict is coming, and if you do not intervene fast enough, it will not go your way. But notice how early this happens. The explanation forms before you've decided whether the accusation deserves oxygen at all. The defense appears before you've questioned whether the frame itself is legitimate. Something inside you has already accepted a lower position. This is not a personality flaw. It is not insecurity in the way people casually use the word. It is a survival pattern learned long before adulthood. Somewhere early on, you discovered that being understood meant being safe, that explaining yourself could reduce punishment, restore approval, or make tension disappear. And it worked, just enough to wire the response into your nervous system. Over time, defense stopped being a strategy and became an identity posture. You learned to anticipate judgment and preempt it. You learned to manage perception before perception ever arrived. And eventually, you stopped noticing that you were doing it at all. What makes this pattern so dangerous is not that it looks weak, it's that it feels responsible, reasonable, mature. You tell yourself you are being fair, transparent, communicative. But beneath that story is something colder, a quiet agreement to live reactively, to let external friction determine your internal position, to hand other people the power to destabilize you simply by questioning you. And the more intelligent, articulate, and self-aware you are, the easier it becomes to justify this behavior as virtue rather than submission. Machiavelli understood something that modern life encourages you to forget. Power does not belong to the person with the best explanation. It belongs to the person who never accepts the role of defendant in the first place. Yet most people move through the world as if they are permanently on trial, defending their motives, their tone, their decisions, their worth. They explain not because they must, but because silence feels unbearable, because silence feels like losing, and that discomfort is not accidental, it was trained. The unsettling question is not whether defending yourself works in the moment. Sometimes it does. The real question is what it trains you to become over time, because every defense teaches your body the same lesson, that you are safest when you justify your existence. And once that belief sets in, the power dynamic is already decided, long before the next accusation ever arrives. And that leads to a more disturbing possibility. What if the real loss of power doesn't happen when you are attacked, but when you instinctively step forward to explain? What makes this reflex so difficult to see is that it doesn't survive on conflict. It survives on reward. The moment you explain yourself, something subtle happens in the environment around you. Tension decreases. Suspicion softens. The conversation moves forward. Nothing explodes. Nothing collapses. In fact, things often feel smoother afterward. And that smoothness is what trains the behavior long before you ever question it. You learn without being taught that explanation prevents friction. That justification keeps you included. That clarity makes you safe. Over time, the urge to defend yourself stops feeling like a choice and starts behaving like a reflex, because the world consistently confirms that reflex as reasonable, mature, even responsible. No one has to demand your explanation. You arrive with it already prepared. You offer context before context is requested. You fill silence before silence becomes uncomfortable. And each time the environment rewards you by moving on. This is how defense becomes invisible, not because it is weak, but because it is efficient. It keeps interactions orderly. It keeps hierarchies unchallenged. It keeps roles predictable. And predictability is comforting to everyone involved, especially to systems that benefit from you staying legible. Over time, you stop noticing how quickly you step forward to clarify, to soften, to prove intent. You don't feel dominated. You feel cooperative. You don't feel controlled. You feel understood. But something important has shifted beneath the surface. Authority no longer lives in what you do. It lives in what you preempt, in what you remove from the room before anyone has to ask. Defense becomes a form of self-regulation, a way of managing how you are perceived so that nothing escalates. And because escalation never arrives, the cost never becomes obvious. What disappears instead is friction, the kind of friction that reveals where power actually sits. You begin to function inside conversations rather than shape them. You respond rather than occupy. You clarify rather than stand. From the outside, this looks like emotional intelligence. From the inside, it feels like vigilance. You are always slightly ahead of the moment, anticipating misunderstanding, correcting narratives that haven't fully formed yet. And because this anticipation keeps things calm, it is reinforced again and again. Until one day, you no longer remember when you last waited to see what would happen if you didn't explain. Not because you are afraid of conflict, but because the habit of defense has reorganized how you experience interaction itself. The world has not asked you to give up authority. It has simply rewarded you every time you did. And once a behavior is rewarded consistently, it no longer needs to be questioned. It just happens. Which raises a more unsettling question. If explanation feels necessary not because you are attacked, but because the system runs smoother when you preempt resistance, what exactly happens when you don't? And more importantly, what kind of power depends on you always stepping forward first? There is a weakness in this system, but it is not where most people look for it. It does not break under resistance, and it does not collapse when it is named. In fact, it often becomes more efficient once you notice it, because awareness tends to arrive too late in the sequence to matter. The system does not depend on ignorance. It depends on timing. Specifically, it depends on the fact that defense happens before anything actually occurs, before anyone accuses you, before any threat is confirmed, before any judgment is spoken. Your body has already moved. Your explanation is already forming. Your justification is already rehearsed. You are not responding to reality. You are responding to a prediction. And predictions have a dangerous property. They cannot be corrected by what hasn't happened yet. Reality can push back. Reality can contradict. Reality can surprise. Anticipation cannot. It only compounds itself. This is why defending yourself feels most urgent before the moment arrives, not after. Once something actually happens, the tension often dissolves on its own. But anticipation offers no such release. It feeds on imagined futures, rehearsed outcomes, internal simulations that never get tested against the real world. And because those simulations never collide with evidence, they grow sharper, more convincing, more absolute. This is where the instability lives. Not in confrontation, but in preemption. Not in action, but in sequence. The entire structure relies on you stepping forward before you are required to, because once the moment has passed, once the interaction has ended, once the outcome is known, there is nothing left to defend against. The system needs you to arrive early. It needs you to speak before silence has a chance to exist. It needs you to justify before anyone asks, because justification after the fact has a very different meaning. One explanation can be dismissed. A pattern of preemptive explanation becomes identity, and identity is much harder to challenge than behavior. This is why awareness alone does not free you. By the time you notice the reflex, it has already done its work. The authority has already shifted. The premise has already been accepted. Even restraint, when it arrives as a decision, often arrives too late. It becomes another form of management layered on top of the same sequence. Watching yourself hesitate, monitoring your own silence, policing your reactions. The system absorbs that too, because the weakness is real, but it is not accessible through force, discipline, or insight. It exists only at the level of timing, and timing is the one thing you never seem to control when the pressure hits first, which raises a more unsettling question than whether defending yourself costs power. What kind of structure requires you to arrive early every time in order to survive at all? Once this pattern is seen, it does not collapse, it adjusts. That is what makes it difficult to escape. Awareness does not interrupt it. Awareness becomes another layer inside it. You begin watching yourself before others do. You monitor your tone, your pauses, your expressions, not to dominate the interaction, but to prevent deviation. What once happened automatically now feels deliberate, and that deliberateness is mistaken for progress. You tell yourself you are choosing restraint, choosing silence, choosing composure, but the pressure has not disappeared. It has simply moved inward. The system survives by turning insight into surveillance. You are no longer defending yourself out loud, but you are still defending yourself in advance. You are rehearsing reactions you may never need. You are measuring responses that have not yet been asked for. The urgency has not been removed. It has been privatized. This is where the structure becomes most efficient, because no one has to impose it anymore. You impose it on yourself. Repetition does the rest. One moment of restraint feels intentional. A pattern of restraint becomes expectation, and expectation hardens into identity. You are now the person who manages the room by managing yourself, not through presence but through control, not through silence but through anticipation. This is why effort starts to feel heavy, not because you are resisting others, but because you are resisting potential futures that may never arrive. Control replaces contact, monitoring replaces response, functioning replaces authority. From the outside, you look composed, you look mature, you look unreactive. From the inside, you feel compressed, narrowed, always slightly ahead of yourself. This is not wisdom. It is optimization under constraint, and the constraint is invisible because it feels like responsibility. Machiavelli understood this without moral language. Power does not vanish when it is threatened, it relocates. When direct defense becomes costly, power shifts into preemption. When preemption becomes visible, it shifts again into internal management. This is why trying to do it better never resolves the tension. Refinement is not escape, it is reinforcement. The more carefully you manage yourself, the more the system confirms that management is necessary. Eventually, the strain is no longer about what others might do. It is about maintaining the structure itself. Control becomes heavier than fear ever was. And that is the point where something subtle begins to change. Not because you decide to change it, not because you apply a new rule, but because the cost of staying ahead starts to outweigh the benefit. The urgency that once arrived first begins to lose precision. It does not disappear. It simply stops organizing everything in advance. And when urgency no longer leads, the system that depended on it can no longer operate the way it used to.